Coming up on this edition of Press Watch 2012, Body Language and Presence. When did journalism become a critique of the political theater? Do viewers really want a breakdown of smiles and sneers, or is it lazy reporting? And later, Press Watch's bravos and blunders. The end of an interview that lit up the internet, and it's a photo that's funny, but should it have been news? Welcome to Press Watch 2012. I'm Stephen Leahy. Press Watch is a production of the Mass Communications Department at Oklahoma City University, made possible by the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. We're looking at national news media coverage of the presidential campaign and the news in light of ethical guidelines within the professional journalism community. And to do that today, our guests are Phil Cross, an investigative reporter for the local Fox affiliate, Fox 25, and Maddie Alexander, a political science and communications student here at Oklahoma City University. Thank you and welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to be talking today about the New York Times coverage and many other places coverage of the theme of optics, especially in light of the recent presidential and vice presidential debates. Now, it's important to remember that some of these are going to be slightly previous to the first presidential debates. So first we have a New York Times piece, and if we could bring that up on the screen, we have from the New York Times: the best political reporters, and there are many ones, treat optics as a veneer to be deconstructed. But there is also a common habit today of covering optics for their own sake. For some reporters, narrating the optics of a thing can substitute for covering the thing itself. Now, we have a recent example of that we'd like to discuss. Now, this is from Stephen Colbert, again, just after the first presidential debate. Now, we know Stephen Colbert isn't actually considered a hard journalist, but he makes a valid point. If we could pull that up.
What counts is body language, right, Megyn Kelly?
It was an interesting dynamic to see Mitt Romney looking mostly over at President Obama when he was making his points, and President Obama choosing to look mostly at Jim Lara or looking down.
Now, she does make a point, and we discussed in the intro, do the viewers of news honestly care about smiling versus sneering? And this is not picking on Megyn Kelly, of course, but is that the first thing we notice, and should that be the topic of conversation? Mr. Cross, what do you think on that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to know that, Stephen Colbert is a comedian, to take it out of, the perspective. I mean, I watched a lot of the debate coverage, and there are a lot of other topics that came up in view of substance of the debate. However, when you're looking at a debate, especially a televised debate these days, I think that is important. That is something that people notice. I know we don't have it yet, but the video last night of the vice presidential debates, you had a lot of commentary going back and forth on the smiles versus the sneers, and how much that plays into a role, because people are really connected to the people of the debate. They want to know not so much their talking points, but they want to know who they are and what they actually stand for.
That makes sense. And Maddie, you look on both sides of the scenario. You can see it from a politician's point of view, a student's point of view, and from a journalist's point of view. Do you think that it's an important topic, that we cover it as we should?
I think that the coverage is so focused on the theatrics that it takes away from the original message of the politicians. Yes, they're canned speeches, and they're practiced and rehearsed, and they're not really answering the questions, but at the same time, it's more important to focus on the content rather than if Obama's looking down or looking at the moderator. And even in the vice presidential debates, there was so much talk afterwards of who's smiling, who's smirking, who are they looking at, who's sighing. At one point, Joe Biden let out a sigh and made some, condescending sound, and that gets bad press. But at the same time, it's really should be focused on the content, and that's kind of a problem.
I understand. Now, I'm going to toss this out to both of you, whoever feels like answering first. The optics, obviously, we do associate with confidence and intelligence, and they are a cue to people watching how to make a decision. Do we editorialize when we discuss these things?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, there is an editorial aspect to it, which is why you've got to be very careful whenever you get into that sort of thing. When you see an article written about it or a story done about it, you also have to think that, you know, there's dozens and dozens of other reporters covering, you know, each individual element of it, and now there is so much news coverage that everybody's trying to look for a way to break out their coverage from something else. So you can have your political analysts talk about the substance of the message. You can talk about, you know, I mean, there's going to be people who are breaking down, you know, what they wore, you know, how they entered, how long their handshake was. You know, there's all. We're in a society that just craves information, and it's got to be provided somehow. And I think you're seeing a lot more of that, and you're going to continue to see a lot more of that, because in the end, these debates are not largely about influencing the undecided voters or changing people's minds. A lot of people are, you know, may look for them for that, but in reality, a lot of people already have their mind made up about who they're going to vote for. I spoke with a political scientist the other day who said, you know, this race is going to come down to who rallies their base the most. More so than any election in the past, it's going to be who can get out their base voters, and that's what these debates are for. They're to really speak to that core base and try to energize them to say, you know what, this is a long fight, we've been in it for a while. Now is the time when we really need your help, and you know, maybe reach out to some of the independents. But in reality, that independent voter thing, I don't know whether these debates will actually sway them or not, or whether anything. You know, you do have a certain number of people that, you know, it's like, I like that guy's tie, I'm going to vote for him. You know, you're just going to have those people, and so you've got to kind of cater to everybody and give everybody a little bit of what they want. And you know, political theater is theater. I mean, it's entertainment, and a lot of people watch it for that.
Do you agree, Maddie?
I do agree, especially voter turnout is going to be a huge decision in this election. It's going to be a major factor, because the same population that's voting for Obama that was in 2008 isn't as fired up as they previously were. Same thing goes with Mitt Romney. People aren't proud and fired up that he's their candidate. He's just kind of a mediocre candidate, and I think that's going to be a huge problem. When you talk about the debates, a lot of pressure rests on the handshake, even who extends their hand first, to kind of overpower the other speaker. And that, I mean, I don't think that's what should excite your voters. It should be about your policies. And even there have been studies showing candidates' appearance, political party removed, people have looked at two candidates and said, you know, who looks like they would be the most trustworthy, the most intelligent, who looks like they would be a better political official, and the person that they chose almost always ends up winning the race. And
Interesting.
I think it's kind of sad that people pay more attention to the theatrics and the optics than they do the actual message and the policies.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you can also look at the height difference too. Usually, I mean, studies have shown usually the taller candidate wins, the one who kind of portrays. I remember when I worked at a TV station in Iowa, we did gubernatorial debates, and you had a candidate who was just a very large, just presence, you know, on the stage, you know, versus a guy who's kind of, you know, short and lanky and wasn't really, didn't really have that commanding presence. And I think that's what people look for in a leader. It may seem kind of shallow or on the surface level, but you do want to make sure that if you're electing your leader, that you want to make sure that they are a person that really commands a room, and that you have confidence in them as a person, and you know their politics. You know, you know, you can go to their websites and you can read their talking points, and you can listen to their, you know, their talking points back and forth in a debate all day long. But you know, a lot of people do want to say, you know, who is more presidential, who is more of a leader here, and who's going to take command of the situation. When you do have two just very powerful figures in a room, it's kind of an interesting battle to kind of see who really dominates in that sort of situation.
And that makes sense. And the media plays a huge part in making that decision, or helping the voters make that decision. And we actually have two quotes, or two video clips from Chris Matthews and Chuck Todd on MSNBC and NBC talking about exactly that and how important it is. If we could bring those up.
Get the person off the memorized material, because we're so bored with that, and we don't think it teaches anything. You had a point about behavior, body language, and smiling. I was taken with your idea that if you smile too much, it looks like a smirk, that you have to hold your smile to what's funny. How about that use of the smile when something's really funny?
What changed the race? And what's important is that style has always mattered in these things. It is sort of that feel that you get for a candidate, whether it was Kennedy, Nixon, whether it was Carter, Ford, whether it was Reagan, Carter. We can go through it time and again. When Reagan lost the first debate, Mondale looked like he had energy. He looked like he had ideas, and Reagan looked listless. So,
and obviously style does play a significant part in how elections are run in this country, and the media is a part of that. And I was wondering, Maddie, do you think that the historical perspective that we have here of having these huge debates in the past, Nixon and JFK, just these events having huge influence, do you see that being part of the media's role?
I do, definitely. Even, in 1960, between JFK and Nixon, Nixon was looked upon as kind of a crony. He looked shady, and JFK was this very attractive, very prominent man, and he won. And a lot of that is attributed to the fact that people were able to see him on the television. And, I mean, even for an example, Chris Christie, he's an obese man. People have debated whether or not we'll be able to elect a disabled person or someone who is obese, because they don't look good on a screen to some people. And whether or not they actually look good or not is irrelevant. It's about their policies.
And that's an interesting topic. Do you think, Mr. Cross, that the media plays a role in the discerning between, say, being able to have an obese person or even a disabled person run for office?
I don't think I think it's a matter of personal preference, really, as to what you want to see. I don't think that the media per se, as an entity, would have that much, control over saying, if someone's running for office, you're going to put them on the screen, no matter what.
Right.
It's going to be a matter of whether or not their ideas and their personality is going to be able to garner enough attention. Obviously, Chris Christie, not a presidential candidate, yet he's a politician and a successful politician. He's governor of New Jersey. New Jersey has televisions. New Jersey has the media. He was able to get on screen there and appeal to voters enough in a more liberal setting than we're used to in Oklahoma, and even with his weight was able to win the support of voters and is now governor of the state of New Jersey.
So that makes sense, and we're going to have to go to a break now, but we'll be back soon to talk more about this. Coming up on Press Watch, more on news coverage of political optics, the trouble expert reporters face when they find themselves giving expert advice, and the idea that we don't need to hear the message in order to know who won a debate. That's right after this. Welcome back to Press Watch 2012, where we're looking at the national news, media, and ethics and how it all works during this presidential election. Still with us are Phil Cross, investigative reporter with Fox 25, and Maddie Alexander, political science and mass communication student here at OCU. Now, next up, we're going to show a video from Howard Dean discussing how important optics are, and especially in the theme of a debate. Now, if we could bring that up for our viewers and for our guests.
The key to a debate, if you want to see how it moves the American people, is to turn off the sound. Watch the mannerisms. It's not what they say. There may be a zinger and that could change things, but it's not what they say, it is their mannerisms. It's how they come across.
It's how they come across. And you brought this up earlier, and I think that's really interesting, is the press has the ability to change perception, to talk about how they come across, to talk about the way that they look, and to be a vehicle of information. Do you think that we do that when we talk about optics, that that's something that we can
I don't know necessarily whether it changes people's minds. I think, like we were discussing during the break, it tends to reinforce what you already believe or don't believe, and if it changes any minds, it's within those base voters. Like Maddie said earlier, you had, with Mitt Romney, you had a lot of conservatives who were not enthused that he was the candidate that they had that was going to be the ticket. You know, there was some enthusiasm that came with picking Paul Ryan, who was a more conservative Tea Party favorite, to be his VP. That energized people. But whenever they saw Mitt Romney come out and dominate in the first presidential debate, it really energized a lot of conservative voters to say, "Wow, this is who we want. This is what we've been saying. This is our guy." And then, for example, last night with Joe Biden in the vice presidential debates, you had the same thing from the Democrat side, who didn't necessarily get the performance they wanted out of the president during the first debate. They saw Joe Biden come out and really be that eloquent attack dog
Right.
to really hammer in the key talking points and show up to the debate. That's what we really saw with the vice presidential debates. Is you saw two people that really wanted to be there and were both very energized and very ready for that fight.
And Maddie, I'm curious about your position on this, that obviously optics are something that we discuss a lot and that they can make or break a performance, but is it, in your eyes as a mass communication student, is it the press's responsibility to break through that while they have to cover it at some point, but also moving beyond that and talking about policy?
I mean, yes, as a mass communication student, I believe that the press should cover it because in the end, it is what turns out voters. Obama looking discouraged doesn't make his voters feel excited to get out and vote for him. Same thing with Mitt Romney. If he doesn't appear like he's doing well, his voters who are already not enthused to have him as the candidate, aren't going to get out and vote for him. However, as a political science major, I'm inclined to think that optics are fairly important because that is a good way to energize your voters, and that, I mean, even if it's, they're not paying attention to policy, that's another way to get them to get out and vote for you. And in this election, voter turnout is what's going to decide the election.
Yes. And we have another piece from a New York Times article talking about expert advice turning into strategy advice. Now, this is from the New York Times. We have, at times, reporting from a strategist standpoint goes all the way. In these cases, the reporter ceases merely to write from that perspective. Instead, he internalizes the strategist's problems so fully that they become, in a sense, his own problems. And we have another video, or another full screen to give us a concrete example of that. This is a memo from Crowley to Governor Christie, just after during the preparation for the debate, when he talks up the nominee's performance. And Crowley says to Governor Christie, no, 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 no. Standard operating procedure for pre-debate chatter is to lower expectations for your guy by raising expectations for the other guy. And I find that interesting because we talk about politics a lot, and we talk about strategy a lot, and so it's easy for news coverage or people who do coverage of these things to become well-versed in the topic. But do we cross a line when we start saying, no, that's not what you should do, this is what you should do? Phil?
Absolutely, absolutely. You've got to maintain that balance and that objectivity. And no matter how much you cover it, how big of an expert that you become on the topic, I mean, that's the beauty of working in TV news, is that, especially local TV news, you tend to learn to become an expert quickly on a lot of things, and if you have a topic that's interest to you, you can be that expert and provide that, but you still always, for any TV story, you can't be the expert. You've got to maintain that objectivity and go out and find your experts for your story. And you need to always make sure that you're staying detached enough while you may agree or vehemently disagree with what the person you're interviewing is saying or what the topic is. It's kind of a rule to say, you know what, let's just, you say what you're going to say, you say what you're going to say, and you decide.
That makes a lot of sense. And Maddie, I'm curious for your perspective on this. As a person who looks at both sides of the field, you can take a view from behind the scenes, from the strategist's point of view. Does the media's coverage influence, in this particular case we talk about the response to Governor Christie, is that a situation when the media says this that the campaign suddenly has to shift direction? Do we become policy drivers?
Oh, I think it's completely wrong for the media to do that. They're not part of the campaign staff. They're not campaign strategists. And I'm sure the campaign staff is sitting on the other side going, why is the media trying to tell us to do this? And having worked on campaigns, it's inappropriate for someone in the media to say, no, this is how you should be running your campaign, and this is how you should be presenting your candidate. I do agree with her point that that's what you're supposed to do before debates, but at the same time, as a member of the media, she shouldn't be telling the governor to do that, and that's the job of the campaign staff. That's why they're there.
I understand. Now, we are going to go to a quick break, but we'll be back soon. So coming up next on Press Watch, the segment we do every week called Bravos and Blunders, the best and worst we've seen in political journalism. This week, though, it's a little more contentious. We'll take a look at a local reporter's interview that ended abruptly and whether that walkout was justified or just a mistake. Stay with us. Welcome back to Press Watch 2012. It's time now for Press Watch's Bravos and Blunders, examples of the best and worst we've seen in journalism recently. And we'll bounce those off Phil Cross from Fox 25 and OCU student Maddie Alexander. Thank you both for sticking around with us. First off, we're going to start with a, as we said, contentious piece from a Paul Ryan interview by a local reporter that ends abruptly. And we'll show that to you without comment and allow your first opinions to come out.
Is to help teach people good discipline, good character. That is civil society. That's what charities and civic groups and churches do to help one another make sure that they can realize the value in one another.
And you can do all that by cutting taxes, with a big tax cut.
Those are yours, not mine.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah. Sorry. That was kind of strange. You're trying to stuff words in people's mouths?
Well,
I don't know if that's strange. No, but it sounds like you're trying to answer the question for me. I think that's a little odd.
And obviously this is a huge problem when it goes viral on the internet and people are talking about it left and right. And I'm wondering if, have you seen, that was from an ABC affiliate in Detroit. I'm wondering if you've seen in Oklahoma, if you've seen either on another station or even something unfortunate happen in your own station where the interview just goes off the rails, someone says, that's it, we're done. And how do you respond to that?
No, I don't think I've ever had anybody just flat out walk out on me before. Be nice to happen though. In this case though, I'm not sure. I mean, I saw this prior to coming here today, and read some articles associated with it, and it's interesting. I'm not necessarily sure the characterization of Paul Ryan walking out is necessarily a good one. I think that's where we get into this whole, are we editorializing things, because it was, you know, clearly his handler who said, all right, your time's up, which, having done political interviews and been involved in the planning of these, a lot of times when you get these big name candidates in, especially when I worked in Iowa and set these things up, you would have, you get 5 minutes, and that's not 7 minutes or take, you know, as much time as you want. It's 5 minutes and you're done. A lot of times you have the light set up, you have you have to come in, put your camera up, plug in that microphone, and that's the time you get. And in I believe the Ryan's campaign statement was that this reporter had already went over his time, and that's what they're doing. However, calling it an unfair question, I don't think is necessarily, because when you're a political candidate, everything's a fair question. Everything should be fair game. But then also you go kind of back on the other side, and about the worst thing that you could possibly do as a campaign person is cover up the lens and say, this is, you know, that's going to make it a bigger issue. It's like when you go out to a story and you have a PR person says, this really isn't a story. I mean, those are the magic words that get you put on TV.
That makes sense. And Maddie, I'm wondering from the other point of view, Do you think that the jump from talking about these programs to tax cuts, is that on the handler's side or on Paul Ryan's side, is that a fair jump? Do you see that as a reason to cut the cord?
Oh, I think it's a very valid question. They go from talking about gun control was the original question, and then Paul Ryan talks about how he wants to institute all these programs to teach people how to behave better, and he wants to have all these community centers, and the reporter says, and you want to achieve that with tax cuts. And I think he had a little bit of an attitude when he said it, so I think that's also a little off-putting. At the same time, it is a valid question, because when they propose all of these tax cuts and say, you know, we're going to cut funding for a lot of public programs, it is a valid question to say, how are you going to do that when you're going to cut taxes, but then again, you want to establish these programs? And Paul Ryan kind of took it in another direction when they were talking about gun laws and gun control, and he talked about civic education and community centers. It wasn't particularly relevant. But the reporter ran with it and got him into trouble. As
possibly they should have done. And we have one more piece that we'd like to show in our Bravos and Blunders, and we're calling this one a blunder. It's a still photo that the AP sent out to a number of their members that has made its way across the internet as well. And I'm wondering, they came back after some time and gave some more context to the caption of this photo. But as a news station, do you feel like when you receive something like this from the AP, is this an ethical dilemma for you? Are we not providing context for these kinds of photos? When we show it on its own, it's funny and not particularly newsworthy.
Well, first of all, for TV, we do get a lot of stuff from the Associated Press, but we don't really run with their photos as much. I did see the AP issued a statement that said that photo or their caption that went out with it fell below their own quality of standards, because the caption they originally sent out was just Mitt Romney's going to sit down with some school kids. Their corrected version of it explained that little girl was actually excited because Mitt Romney was going to sit right next to her, and she didn't know that he was going to be right next to her, and she was very excited to see him. So I think that you do have to provide that sort of context. But again, whenever you're sending out, there are pictures everywhere. Every moment, every frame of your life can be captured, and sometimes there's it's make of it what you will. This one, I think, became more of a story when we're in a political season, and each side's going to take what they want and go with it. And so the media caused it in a certain way by sending that out, but they also reacted to it once it went out there. That could have been anybody's picture. That could have been anybody that was gathering there and just posted a picture on the internet and said, "Boom, here it is." And I think each side would have made of it what they wanted to, and then the media has to cover it and provide the context.
And context is key. We actually have from the National Press Photographers Association Code of Ethics, there is an excerpt that says, "Be complete and provide context when photographing or recording subjects." Now, obviously they came back and gave a far more detailed context for this photo so that we all understood what's actually happening here. But Maddie, as a news consumer and as a student of mass communications, does this strike you as an ethical dilemma of whether or not to send this out?
I mean, a funny picture is a funny picture. Everyone who's seen it has laughed at it. Do I think it's appropriate for the news story? Probably not. I'm sure it's not the only photo that was taken that day, and there are probably better photos that would represent what was happening that day. So is it unethical? I would say no. It was just kind of in poor taste. At the same time, you have a picture of Barack Obama. There's a picture where he's going to shake someone's hand, and it looks like he's grabbing the rear end of the lady that's standing next to him. And that was released, and people made fun of it. But, I mean, there are always going to be those funny photos on campaigns because there is unfortunate timing, but it doesn't necessarily need to go out with the news.
And you also have to kind of keep in mind that we are in a 24-hour, minute-to-minute news cycle. And you know, I'm not making any sort of judgment call on that, because obviously that photo needed some more context to go along with it. But when you talk about that picture of the president that, you know, the looked inappropriate, you know, you've got this rush to kind of get things out, and you look at the picture and like, all right, we got the president shaking somebody's hand, perfect, send it out. And it's only later that someone else, you know, looks at it like, oh my gosh, do you know what what it looks like? And you're like, no, there's the president shaking his hand. I mean, there's a lot of times whenever you can see something, you have, if you're involved in it and you're really there in the moment, you're like, well, this is what happened. I didn't really, you know, you're focused on the main subject and not realizing the whole picture necessarily. So I think you get kind of there is that ability to kind of get caught up in that. But obviously, you do need to. I mean, if you're an organization, you do need to make sure that you have not just, you know, one person looking over that. You've got to have an editor to say, all right, let's see, does this need a little more explanation, or does this, you know, stand on its own and just sit it out? Right.
Maybe being on the scene provides a little too much context. Well, that's about all the time that we have, so thank you both so much for joining us today. Press Watch is a production of Oklahoma City University in partnership with the Excellence and Ethics in Journalism Foundation. We'll do this again next week. See you then.